Ghost train. If my management sends me on another mission to some backwoods village, I'm gonna quit right away, because my heart can't take another nightmare like the one I had last time. I'll tell you everything in order. I work as a bakery equipment adjuster. I was once sent to repair bread machines in a village, and it is so far away that it is not easy to get to it. 3 hours we drove there with the driver in a company car. When we got there, the driver told me I'd be traveling back alone, by public transportation, and he had to leave immediately on campaign business. So he left. I'm at peace with it. Got the job done in a couple hours. Started getting ready to go home. I talked to a man, and he told me that I could take a commuter train. There's a train station not far away. Not far means a 6-kilometer walk from the village. I came to the platform, if you can call it that, almost ruined from time and covered with cracks. To the left is a forest. To the right, a field, rusty poles, a terrible bench made of 3 iron bars, no information boards or timetables, and not a single person. While I was walking here on some paths, I got very hungry, but there was nowhere to buy anything to eat. I was cold and tired. The weather was terrible. It was drizzling or raining or snowing, and there was nowhere to hide from it. I sat down on a bench, looked at my phone. No signal. So I couldn't look on the internet when the train would arrive. It was starting to get dark. There was a howl from the woods. I was already stiff and angry at the whole world, but suddenly I heard a locomotive horn in the distance. A train was approaching. When it came closer, I opened my mouth in surprise. It was as if it had come from the distant past. All rusty, narrow windshield, one lamp in the front. This ancient marvel came to a deafening halt with a deafening halt with a deafening rumble. I didn't have time to wonder how it could still drive. I had to get out of this place soon. I went in, but there was no one inside. I was used to the automatic and transparent doors and new seats on the trains. So I was very surprised to see old barn doors, shabby benches, and broken windows, and all of this in very dim lighting. It made me feel uncomfortable. I went on. There were people sitting in the car at the head of the train. 8 people. I finally calmed down. I went up and asked the man in the hat, "Dear, how do I buy a ticket? Will the controller come himself?" The man slowly turned his head as if it were hinge. He stared at me and didn't say a word. Some jerk, I thought, and went over to the fat aunt and asked the same thing. She opened her mouth and stared at me without looking away. I cursed. Is everyone here crazy or what?" I decided not to worry about the ticket and sat down in the corner of the door. The sound of the wheels lulled me to sleep. Suddenly I jerked and woke up. Opposite me sat the same man in the hat and the fat aunt and all the others who were in the carriage, and those who didn't fit on the bench were standing next to me. They all had their mouths open, and they all kept their eyes on me. I squirmed in my seat. "What do you want?" They were silent, their mouths open. Their teeth were black and rotten, even the little one, about 4 years old. That one was especially scary. I myself have a 5-year-old son, a lively, ruddy child, and this little beast was a superstitious horror. Suddenly, as if on cue, these strange people slowly turned their heads toward the opposite intercar door. A tall man in a railroad uniform with a bag over his shoulder walked in. Jesus! A conductor, at least one normal person. I rejoiced and jumped up from the bench. But the man in the hat, who was sitting across from me, grabbed my leg sharply. I seriously thought I had lost my mind. Could all this really be happening? The conductor walked over to me, mumbled something, and started picking at his bag. He didn't seem at all confused by the surroundings. Strange passengers with open mouths gathered around to frighten me. I couldn't take it anymore and mumbled, "This is some kind of joke, isn't it? A prank?" The conductor leaned sharply toward my face so that the tip of his nose rested against mine. I swear he didn't open his mouth, but I could clearly hear his voice. "You don't have a ticket. You're not supposed to be here, but you're still coming with us." The man reached down just as abruptly and jabbed his nose into my stomach, sucking in air noisily. Then I felt my heart run away from the horror. I even stopped breathing. The conductor sniffed me from my chest to the top of my head. "There's nothing inside. He's hungry. Then we'll be hungry too. Throw him out." The train came to a screeching halt. All the creepy passengers, led by the conductor, got up, grabbed me by my jacket, and dragged me toward the exit. I clutched my travel bag and prayed to all the gods. I was thrown out of the vestibule and fell into the loose snow. The train moved on, and in the dim, flickering windows, I saw the silhouettes of human skeletons. I looked back, completely unaware of where I was. I decided to walk slowly along the tracks, even though my legs were not obeying me at all. I was shaking, feverishly trying to understand. What was it? A hallucination, a delusion, a dream? And if I told anyone, they wouldn't believe me. I don't believe it myself. I don't know how long I walked like that, but I was lucky. I met a railroad track keeper. He even whistled when he saw me. "Man, what are you doing here? Where are you from?" And I stood there like an idiot, clutching my bag. "Nikolai." That's how the roadrunner introduced himself. He dragged me into the wagon, poured me a vodka. On an empty stomach, I got intoxicated quickly. "Well, tell me what you're doing here. Have you lost your memory?" I told Nikolai the whole story, but he wasn't surprised. "Holy shit, do you know that you were miraculously saved? It's a ghost train, isn't it?" I stared at him incomprehensibly. "There's a legend in our area. Allegedly, in the 50s, a train with people disappeared. But it's not a car, not a bicycle. The train couldn't go anywhere, but they didn't find it. It disappeared, and then rumors began to appear that the train was still running, picking up lonely passengers and leaving with them. I always thought it was a rumor, but my wife's relative, Dmitri, disappeared, and it happened in the 2000s, when the trains were more or less renewed. An acquaintance saw Dmitri from afar as he was getting into an old carriage. He was surprised to hear in the news that new electric trains had been launched. But here, some old stuff was riding, and that's it. I haven't heard from Dmitri since. God knows why you got lucky. But it's a miracle, isn't it? Why don't you go to church? I went to church. Thanked God. By the way, I've been looking for more information about this strange ghost train, but I didn't find out much, so I don't go to any more remote villages, even if they fire me, or only by car with normal, live escorts. I read a letter from a subscriber of an esoteric magazine named Svetlana. My husband's mother is a very complicated person. She constantly finds fault with me. She disapproves of the clothes I wear, criticizes my cooking, claims I can't clean the floors properly, and accuses me of being unfaithful to my husband. This is just a small part of what she expresses towards me. Once, when my husband was away on a trip, and we were alone together, we had a heated argument. She started saying nasty things about my parents, and that's when I couldn't take it anymore. All the accumulated resentment from years of living under the same roof with her erupted like a poisonous fountain. After expressing myself, I grabbed my bag, documents, slammed the door, and left the house, vowing never to return. I walked down the street, crying. I do love my husband. It was dark outside, and in this village, I had no one except my husband's family. I decided to go to the neighboring village, where my aunt, my mother's sister, lived. It was very close. You just passed by the cemetery, and you were there. I knew the way perfectly, and the cemetery didn't scare me at all. On the contrary, passing by, there was a strange sense of calmness. It seemed like the wind even stopped blowing near the graveyard. I wasn't at peace inside, of course, but I felt no fear. I had almost walked the entire road along the cemetery when I noticed something flickering among the trees out of the corner of my eye. For a moment, my heart almost stopped from fear. But then I managed to discern in the darkness that it was an old man walking on the path. He called out to me. I stopped, but my heart was still pounding with fear like a rabbit's. "Why are you wandering alone at night?" he asked. "I had a fight with my mother-in-law and my husband. A truck driver hasn't returned from his trip yet," I replied. "You're a hothead who solves problems like that on the spot. We all make mistakes. You need to know how to forgive. Maybe your mother-in-law has suffered all her life from her mother or mother-in-law, and now she's venting her frustration on you. Don't keep your feelings to yourself. Express to her what bothers you, but don't yell. And sometimes give her a hug. We all need affection. Let me walk you to the village. I have a request for you." The old man explained that he was from a distant place, but his relatives lived in the village. Recently, his grandson ended up in the hospital, and he urgently needed to meet someone to save the child's life. He earnestly asked me to go to his relative's house and deliver an envelope to Marina, or Nikolai, the parents of the grandson. I was surprised that the old man had nighttime meetings and wondered why he didn't go to his relatives himself. But I decided to help for the sake of the grandson. So, I agreed to deliver the envelope. The old man explained in detail how to get to his relative's house, and I easily found the place. As soon as I approached the gate, a dog in the yard began to bark fiercely at me, and I thought about running away. However, a woman came out. As I understood, she was the mother of the grandson. "Hello. Are you Marina?" I asked. She confirmed. But when I mentioned that I had greetings from their grandfather, Marina inexplicably screamed, horror reflected on her face. The dog continued to bark desperately, following the woman. A man, apparently Nikolai, came out of the house. I told him that I met the old man who said their grandson was in trouble, and he asked me to deliver an envelope to his relatives. Marina burst into tears and rushed into the house, while Nikolai, deeply concerned, began questioning me about the appearance of the old man and where I had met him. I started describing my companion. Then Nikolai asked me to come into the house. Holding the trembling hands, he opened the envelope and took out a photograph. It showed the old man and a little child biting an apple. On the back, something red resembling blood was written. At that moment, Marina rushed back with a pile of photo albums, frantically searching through the pictures. After a few minutes, she pulled out the exact same photo, but without the inscription. I distinctly remember that this photo was the only one. There was no other, only one photo. Like this. I felt uneasy. I don't know how to explain it. I was just asked to deliver the envelope. He seemed like a good old man. Why not help? But our grandfather is dead, Marina suddenly shouted. Which grandfather? Yours. The one I talked to. Are you saying this letter is from a deceased person? Now my hands were shaking. I sat down on a chair. Thoughts were swirling in my head. Nikolai brought me a glass of water and began to tell me that their grandfather, depicted in the photograph, had passed away 6 years ago. Recently, they had indeed faced a tragedy. Their son was involved in a car accident. He tried to avoid a sudden moose emerging from the forest, but lost control and crashed into a fence. The moose was unharmed, but their son suffered a severe spinal injury. An urgent operation was needed, but it required a significant amount of money. The doctors gave them a week to gather the funds, as operating later would be futile. They had to urgently seek money, sell everything of value they had, but it wasn't enough. One might think that your story about the old man was some kind of cruel joke. But where did this photograph come from? Nikolai pondered. Oh, God. Could it be that I was escorted to the village by a deceased person? I even wondered why a stranger, an old man, was walking through the cemetery at night. But how can there be a letter from the dead? When I calmed down a bit, Nikolai suggested escorting me to my aunt's house to make me feel less frightened. As soon as we stepped onto the porch, the dog started barking vigorously and strained against the chain, eager to reach us, but the chain held it back. Actually, Bayan has never behaved like this. He was brought into the house as a puppy by his grandfather, Nikolai explained, attempting to calm the dog. However, it continued its relentless barking. As Nikolai approached the length of the chain, the dog rose on its hind legs and lunged at Nikolai's chest. In Nikolai's shirt pocket lay the mysterious photograph. When he took it out, Bayan whimpered and started licking the picture. Then, suddenly, the dog darted in the opposite direction, towards the garden, but the chain restrained it. Nikolai instructed me to go into the house, grabbed a flashlight, and went towards the dog. He unhooked Bayan, and the dog rushed into the garden. Marina and I followed them. Bayan sat near an old, sprawling apple tree, barking. Then he began digging the soil around the tree's roots. He dug for a long time, and we watched the dog, captivated. Finally, he sat down and barked. Nikolai shone the light into the hole, said nothing, ran for a shovel, and after a while pulled out a large box from under the tree's roots. Inside was some kind of document, under the flashlight's glow. We tried to figure out what this document was. It resembled a bank account in the grandson's name, and the sum mentioned was much larger than the one needed for the treatment. Marina and Nikolai decided not to celebrate until they went to the bank and confirmed that they could indeed access the funds. However, the discovery instilled hope in them. It was well past midnight. Amid all these events, I had completely forgotten about my own problems. Nikolai and Marina escorted me to my aunt's house. Despite the late hour, lights were on in the windows. When we entered, I saw my husband and my aunt in tears. As it turned out, as soon as my husband arrived and learned that I had left, he immediately rushed to my aunt's house, but couldn't find me there. They were sure I had done something to myself, and they had already called the hospital, the morgue, and the police department. With the dawn, they planned to search for me in the woods and ravines. I rushed to my husband and started telling him breathlessly about the encounter at the cemetery, receiving a letter from the deceased, and even conversing with him. My husband hugged me tightly and, hiding tears glistening in his eyes, said, "I won't let you go to anyone, especially not to the deceased." This mystical story was told by a nurse from a Russian hospital. Her name is Vera. Most people believe that death is a bony old woman with a scythe, or even a skeleton in a black cloak. I have seen death. Thank goodness, not my own. She was very beautiful. After completing medical school, I was assigned to work in a nursing home. There, I became friends with Elizabeth Miranovna. The old lady lived in a separate room, without neighbors. She probably pays well, I thought when I first saw her. She never complained. On the contrary, she often joked about herself and others, sometimes quite harshly. Overall, she was a very eccentric lady in her 90s. I ended up here of my own free will. I have no children, no family, a professor's pension, an apartment in the city center, decent savings. When I felt myself weakening, I sold everything. My home, my country house, my valuables. I put the money in the bank, and a trusted person manages it. And here I am, moved here. The only relative is my niece. She never communicated with me and didn't even call. But now she visits frequently. Why would that be? Her niece, a chubby, sweaty woman with greasy hair, disgusted me. Once I overheard her exclaiming to a man waiting for her in the corridor, "When will that old wreck die, anyway? She has no more heirs. Vera, come in when you're free." The old lady called me then. Dispose of everything Senia brought. If she did something underhanded, throw it in the trash. Make sure no one can find and eat them. Maybe she wanted to poison me, and poor homeless animals, or people might get poisoned. Our facility was located outside the city in a forest park zone. If you missed the last bus, there was no way to get home. That happened. That time. Couldn't make it to the last bus? Elizabeth Miranovna asked. Come to me. Today, an old friend brought a delivery. Lots of delicious things. Let's feast. I want to indulge myself before death. I saw death yesterday. My own death. She came, sat on the edge of the bed, looked at me reproachfully, and then said, "You forgot to remember me. Correct thee." "Mistake. I'll come for you." "No. You'll die for a long time. Agonizingly. Like me. Do you think I've lost my mind? No. Let's pour a glass of wine. I can do anything now." In the evening, it started raining, and we lost power. It happened quite often. I brought a candle to Elizabeth Miranovna's room. She drank a bit, although it was strictly forbidden. I refused. I committed a great sin. I sent a young, almost unknown woman to the other side. How did I ruin her? Oh, I was 25. Graduated from university, wanted to pursue a career in academia. Then I fell ill. The doctors diagnosed cancer. What treatment was there in those days? I was withering away before their eyes, and I didn't want to die. She sighed, paused for a moment, and continued. So I turned to an old witch. She advised me to transfer the disease elsewhere. Warned, though, you'll change your fate, give death to someone else. But what will happen afterward? No one knows. Decide for yourself. Did I listen? I wanted to live. I had to take my most beautiful dress, recite a spell on it, tie it a certain way, and throw it at a crossroads at midnight. Then, without looking back, go home. A tailor made that dress for me on order. I loved it dearly. I had to part with it. I did everything the witch said. And you know what? I started to recover. The doctors couldn't recover. The doctors couldn't believe it. The old lady fell silent. And then I met her, a Katerina, in my dress. She lived on the next street. I asked a mutual acquaintance where she got that dress. They said Katya bought it at a second-hand store. How it ended up there, I have no idea. And 3 months later, Katya was no more. Cancer. They buried her in that dress. And since then, my troubles began. I got married, wanted a child. God didn't give it. My husband left for another. So I lived my whole life alone. I had everything. Money, an apartment, a country house, made a career, but there was no happiness. Open the window. It's stuffy for me. A gentle breeze swayed the candle flame. Suddenly, Miranovna tensed, grabbed my hand. Do you see her? A female silhouette detached from the wall. It slowly approached us. I became scared, screamed. The vision disappeared. So, you saw her too, the old lady said affirmatively. Let's remember her. I didn't want to harm her specifically. I just wanted to live. Well, why justify myself? If not her, I would have transferred my deadly illness to another woman. Let her forgive me if she can. Okay, go. But I couldn't fall asleep. There was such a storm outside that it drove away any sleep. I decided to go and check on Elizabeth Miranovna. She lay with closed eyes, and the same young woman sat next to her, holding her hand and speaking softly. I am your death. I came for you. I don't hold it against you. I accepted your death. You lived my life. What is scarier is still unknown. I was horrified. When I came to my senses, the window was open, the candle was extinguished, and the old lady had passed away. I hope her death was peaceful. I saw death, even if it was someone else's. But now I understand. Everyone has their own, and its appearance is perceived differently by everyone. Since I was a child, I felt that I had abilities that made me different from others. Sometimes I could see things that others didn't notice. Shadows in the garden behind the house, the glow of a fire that wasn't really there, or strange sounds. Lena and I met when we were studying at the technical college, and then we got married. Our daughter, Liza, was born. We found a job in a village far from our hometown. My wife dreamed of her own house in a quiet place. So I began to look for housing in the same village. And luck smiled on us. A small street going to the forest. At the very beginning, there was a residential house, then a few abandoned ones, and then ours. Behind our house, the forest was already beginning to grow. We made repairs and moved in. My wife and daughter went to visit her parents for a while, and I started to manage. The only other house on the street except for ours was an old hut. Sometimes in the yard of this hut, I saw a hunched, unfriendly old woman. The way to the store and to the bus stop passed by her house, And one day I ran into her face to face and politely said, "Hello, Louie." Said, "Hello. Why the hell did you have to move into that house?" She wheezed. "It's a cursed place. Oriana won't let you live there. You're not the first to try to settle here." Who is this Oriana? A relative of the owners? You'll find out soon enough, she said. You should run away before it's too late. The grandmother went to her room and shut the gate. What a crazy woman, I thought. In the store, a young saleswoman looked at me sympathetically and asked, "Did you move into a house in the suburbs? Well, how do you like it there? Is it not scary to live there? Nothing at night does not bother you?" "No, of course not. Except for the birds outside the window," I smiled back. Soon my wife and daughter returned. In the evening we had dinner, celebrated the housewarming, and I seemed to have drunk more wine than usual. At least I thought so. Lena and Lisa went to bed, and I stayed in the room where my daughter had just been playing. Suddenly, I felt some movement, as if the wind had swayed the curtain. I looked around and was amazed. From the wall by itself, pulled away toy stroller, and my daughter's favorite doll was lying completely different from where she left it. It seemed to move on its own. I shook my head to push the obsession away. "Stop. Who can play dolls in here? Lisa's asleep. We need to drink less," and retired to the bedroom. The next day, when evening came, I heard Lisa talking to someone. Well, here we are. Now we'll live here. And you have no dolls at all. Poor thing. I'll ask Mom and Dad to buy you one. Lisa, who are you talking to? With yourself? Or with a girl? Imagine. She has no dolls. Let's give her a present. Oh, and she's already gone. But it's okay. She'll come tomorrow, she promised. I know that children often make up invisible friends, but I felt a little uneasy. At night, I woke up to a strange rustling noise coming from the children's room. I went to check. Lisa, who had been quietly snoozing not so long ago, was not asleep, but was talking to her invisible friend again, telling her about something. Again, upset that she had no dolls at all. I looked closely and saw a faintly glowing silhouette of a girl near Lisa's crib. She was dressed strangely. A long shirt tied with a rope, a twisted cord on her head. That's how the ancient slaves were depicted in paintings. I took a step toward my daughter, wanting to protect her from the uninvited guest. The vision vanished instantly. The only thing I heard, or rather even felt, were the words, "You are kind. I'll be back." Lisa frowned. Daddy, why are you stopping us from playing? Oriana is good. She just doesn't have a home. She has nowhere to go. In the morning, I went to my neighbor's house. She didn't greet me with much enthusiasm. You must tell me everything," I asked her. I asked for it myself. There was an old pagan burial ground on the site of your house. No one ever settled there. It was a sin, and the shadows of the departed disturbed them. And here comes this insolent man from the capital, even though he was warned not to build on this place. He didn't listen to the people. He built a house, and trouble started. According to a local legend, among the graves was the grave of the sorcerer's daughter. Supposedly, she also had the gift of prediction. Disturbing the graves disturbed her spirit, and so she wanders lost between two worlds. Move out. She'll give you no peace. That's why the old owner left. It's a terrible place to live. The next night, I dreamt of Oriana too. I won't harm you. I ask one thing. Bury us. Take a handful of earth from the plot and bury it in the forest. Put a stone, the one in the garden, as a token of remembrance. It used to mark our cemetery. Put bread, wine, water, sweets for the children, and our souls will be at peace. See the shadows outside the window. There are many of us. Do a good deed. I decided to do what the girl asked. I found a mossy boulder in the weeds, cleaned it up, dragged it to the woods. I went to the house to gather what I needed. Daddy, take my doll to the rock, please. She's never had one, Lisa asked. How do you know that I'm going there? I was stunned. I talked to her. She asked me to visit her there in the clearing sometimes. A few days passed, and one evening we were sitting with my daughter in the yard. Suddenly she said, Daddy, do you see there, in the distance, the glow of a fire? Some people are dancing around it. Oriana said that you and I are like her. We see another world, but don't say anything to Mom. She won't understand or believe it. Let it be our secret, okay? Many years have passed since then. Every year on the day of the summer solstice, Lisa comes, goes to the clearing, and leaves there on a stone a doll for the little girl Oriana, whose spirit we calmed. The most interesting thing is that the next day, the doll mysteriously disappears. This girl was like a hunted animal. Skinny, skin and bones. Shaggy. Hungry. She was brought to the hospital by an ambulance called by neighbors. The girl's family, her stepfather and stepmother, had no time for her. They had been having fun for a week. Lana was diagnosed with severe exhaustion, plus pneumonia. The emergency room doctor at first could not believe that the new patient was already 13, as she was so small and thin. Answers to the simplest questions had to be begged from her for a long time, and if only a little raised voice. The girl's lips immediately began to tremble, and her eyes filled with tears. In general, all the medical staff agreed that the life of the child, until the moment of admission to the hospital, was a real nightmare, and they did not know that all nightmares were ahead of them. The girl was admitted to the intensive care unit. First, they washed her, scraped off the dirt, fed her. But everyone knows that medicine costs a lot of money, and it was impossible to get through to the relatives of the young patient. Yes, of course. The minimum necessary help was given to her, and knives were found, and medicines, but the girl did not even have a toothbrush. Nightgowns and gowns in this hospital patients must have their own. The old, worn-out clothes were immediately thrown away, and what to change into. The chief doctor gave the nurse Masha 2,000 rubles, sent to the store to buy the girl all the essentials. But Masha was more cunning than the man. She went to the market, where you can haggle well. She was able to buy a nightgown for the girl, 3 pairs of panties, slippers, a toothbrush, and a mug. The treatment required antibiotics. They're expensive. Inflammation of the lungs is not a simple cold, which is treated with tea and raspberries, but the head of the department always had some untouchable reserve. Where did it come from? Here. Say, prescribe a patient injections. 3 pieces, and there are 5 ampoules in the package. The other 2 should be returned if they're not needed, but the doctor pretends she forgot. If the patient asks for them, she'll give them back. If they don't, it's left for those who can't buy it themselves, like Lana. She also had bandages, disposable syringes, and many other things. The baby gradually came to herself, recovered, came to life. Her stepfather came once, made sure that Lana was not dead, and left again for a week. The girl's own mother was no longer alive. There were no other close relatives. Longing for warmth and affection, the girl reached out to the nurses, to her neighbors in the ward. Hospital is not the most cheerful place on earth, but it is here that people begin to appreciate the main thing: life and kindness. But time passed. The girl recovered, and it was time to discharge her. The head doctor called the stepfather, called the social service. The stepfather simply dropped the calls, and the social service replied that since the girl had a legal guardian, they could not send her to a shelter. It is necessary to apply to the police to open a case of improper treatment of a minor, and so on. On the eve of her discharge, Lana came to the nurses. It was in the evening, and she begged, "Aunt Nina, don't send me home. Can I live here? I can help. I can scrub the floors, read books if someone is bored. I can run to the shop. Well, lots of things. Ask Peter Vladimirovich, the head doctor, to let me stay here. I don't want to go home. My stepmother's fighting, and my stepfather's asking me strange questions and suggestions." "Well, what do you mean? He's pestering you." The nurses were horrified. "No, he doesn't offer intimacy. Not yet. He and my stepmother are enough. But he makes me drink vodka." They were cunning. When the police came to see us, everything was clean, and they believed my guardians, not me. And then my stepmother beat me, but only so that there were no bruises. The hospital is good. Food, clean bed, no stink. It's like heaven. Well, Aunt Nina, Aunt Ira. However, the girl could not stay in the hospital. They sent her home, as if this could be called home. There's only one morgue in this town, in the same hospital. So that's where they take all the accident victims. That's where Lana was taken a week later. Why the girl was under the wheels of the car, the investigation is investigating. The driver claimed she jumped out of nowhere. He didn't have time to brake. The whole department of doctors were crying. They felt sorry for the unfortunate Lana. Once, when 40 days had passed since Lana's death, Nina, a nurse, was on night duty. She was walking down the corridor, and suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed someone sneaking up behind her. And it should be said that the hospital saves on electricity. At night, there are only 2 lamps burning, at the beginning and at the end of the corridor. But it's right, everyone is asleep. So why burn light for nothing? Nina looked around. No one. She walked on. There's a shadow again, and then she looks. It's the ghost of a girl. She looked closely and realized it was Lana. She's wearing the dress they bought for her, but she's barefoot, her hair falling down over her chest, covering her face. Nina's feet felt like they were frozen to the floor. She wanted to run, but she couldn't move, and Lana raised her head, threw her hair off her face, and it was all disfigured. One eye swollen shut, her lip torn so that her teeth were visible, and her hands are all wounded. It's a terrible sight, but her dress is clean and new, probably newer than it was. And then Lana speaks, quietly, as if she had a runny nose. "Aunt Nina, I'll live here now. It's nice, warm and clean. Let's drink tea." Nina almost died with fear. Her hand went up by itself and crossed herself. Though she was a non-believer and had never been to church before, except for a tour, the girl's ghost whimpered pitifully and disappeared. In the morning, to hear the story of Lana's return to the nurses, came half the hospital, including the chief doctor And the most interesting thing, everyone believed in the ghost of the girl. No one doubted that Nina was telling the truth. Lana was happy here for the first time in her life, said Pyotr Vladimirovich. So she came back. It's a pity about the girl, but we'll have to get rid of her, go to church, order a prayer service for her repose. Believe it or not, it won't hurt. That's what Nina and Nurse Masha did. The ghost stopped appearing, but from time to time at night, they still hear someone humming Lana's favorite song.